we're so far from normal. We're so far from like what life used to be like before, and we're making progress getting back there. And this is such a milestone moment. It's such a recognition that there's a lot more information out there. There's a lot more understanding. There's also a vaccine out there. So I'm sure that you were very well involved with the committee that kind of went through all the process and put the planning in place. How was that before we actually talk about today? Was it difficult? Was it fraught? I know that on some organizations that I work with, the conversations get pretty far flung. But what was it like as the decisions were being made in these committee meetings?
So I think we had some big rocks, right? I think when we started that process, we kept thinking, how will we ever do lunch? And I think people who watch school committee meetings week after week, we would say, I just don't have any idea how we're going to be able to have 900 middle school kids, for example, eat lunch, or 1,200 high school kids eat lunch. And it was a very strange phenomenon. We kept thinking, all right, so you can have 3 lunch periods or 4 lunch periods or 5 lunch, how many do you need? And counted up all those desks that were in the gym, and then the ones in the cafeteria, and the hot lunch and cold lunch. And then at some point, someone said, well, I know that we're not allowed to eat in the auditorium, but if we could do that, we could make it work. And I mean, this is kind of funny retrospectively. I don't know if people remember when every day we'd send home another question like, how would you feel if your kid ate lunch on a beach towel? And I know people must have thought we were crazy, but we were really working through all of those kinds of procedures. So lunch was outrageous. And then we were very lucky that recently the guidance on school buses was relaxed. So now we can put, a child on every bench. We can, there's no real rules. I mean, we can fill up those buses with 2 kids on every seat. What we're trying to do is put 1 child on every bench. And, in the event that we can leave space between them, we do. But yeah, the bus seats are now numbered. So we know who sat where going to school and from school. The kids scan a card, so we know what time you got in, what time you got off. All of that had to sort of be logistically resolved before we could make this happen. In addition to thousands of pieces of furniture moving. On the Friday before vacation, we knew that the custodial staff in the middle school and high school were starting that work. And I can remember being in the middle school and having, one of the custodians come to Ann Van Bennick saying, I can't fit that last desk in that classroom. No, not at 3 feet from side of seat to side of seat. I can't get it in there. And those were the kinds of things that have just been so challenging.
Right. And I know, I remember when you started talking about lunch, and that was by far the biggest thing. Were you able to figure out lunch in the absence of outdoor space in case it was rainy, or did you need to include outdoor space and provide tents or something like that?
Well, to be fair, at the high school, that's going to be the trickiest place. We're very lucky that 130 kids, about 130, have stepped away to do senior project. So that alleviates, 10% of the population, maybe a little more than 10% of the population. And we do have junior and senior privileges. So those kids can go out, get in a car and go get lunch somewhere. And so that's also helpful. There's outdoor seating on nice days. So like today, if you weren't too cold, you could sit outside and have lunch there. But we really are at the high school relying on kids not eating lunch inside the physical building, whether that's because you've taken your privileges or you've gone outside to eat, either in the open air or under a tent. But at the high school, we've had to make those choices.
And I'm sure, as the world is, you got a wide range of feedback from the community, from how could we even be thinking about this to, I wish this was done a month ago. And I'm just curious if you can give kind of a temperature on what the community feedback has been for this plan that you've heard.
I think there are outliers on both sides of that continuum. So we have some parents who on October 1st would have chastised us and said, you should have just brought everybody back right from the get-go. And I'll be honest, I mean, in the summertime, we never thought even this year we would see this day when everybody came back to school. And, even up until the last couple of weeks, we've had parents who have said, my child is hybrid. I felt so comfortable with hybrid, but I just don't know if I can abide having my kids come back to school, my child come back to school in a classroom where there's only 3 feet of social distancing. Is that okay? So we have people living on both sides of that. But for the most part, I think people see this as just kind of that next step in emerging from the pandemic. Jen Parson, the assistant superintendent, and I went over to the high school and the middle school today and just kind of did a very casual tour. And it was so nice to poke your head into a classroom and see kids in rows. And I'll tell you, it looked perfectly traditional in there. And we even saw one teacher say, okay, now I'm going to have everybody turn their desk inward, and kids' faces were still 6 feet apart or maybe 5 feet apart, but they were having conversations about math. And it was nice to see that you could still have a collaborative lesson and practice social distancing. So it looks pretty normal, except all the students wear masks.
Yeah, that's great. It's really good to hear. I'm wondering, I know that vaccine availability has been opened up by now, and I know that there had been more supply coming up. Does the school system track what percentage of staff and teachers have been vaccinated or not?
So if teachers are going to give us that information, health information about themselves, it has to be voluntary. But what I can tell you is at this point, I would say most of our teachers have been able to secure appointments and get vaccinated. There are still a few folks who may have gone like last weekend, for example, and need to wait out those last couple of weeks. But for the most part, I think our teachers are in pretty good shape. Sean McAuliffe from the Public Health Department has offered up some vaccinations. We're collaborating with other communities. So in the event that there is, a custodian or a cafeteria worker or a teacher or someone everybody who works in the Hopkinton public schools fell under that umbrella of educator. So they could all go at one time. But if there are some outliers who still haven't gone, the opportunity to just scoot down the road is there and available to them.
Oh, that's really good.
Right.
And if lunch looks very different than what typically lunch would be. People, students are spread out over a much larger area. Other than that, is the school experience pretty comparable to exactly what it was before, other than everybody's got a mask on? Or are there still any other type of policies in place that might be a little bit different than the before?
No, I think lunch is probably still that big outlier. If you walked into any of the 5 schools and you saw the kids, they really are sitting at, individual desks or in individual seats, truly 6 feet apart. And so that doesn't really lend itself to conversation. I watch and I see some kids will turn and they'll chit chat with the person next to them. But if you remember, and I use the term to be a little bit funny, but the olden days, you'd have, 20 kids all squished in like sardines at one lunch table, and they would be laughing and joking, and it would almost be like cheek to cheek kind of eating lunch. And that social piece is really gone. And that makes me feel a little bit sad for this group of kids because, while you're in the classroom, there's learning and there's socialization, but lunch was truly social before, and that's a little bit lost.
Right. I wonder if, along with that, another piece might be if clubs are still different. I think that the middle school, I don't know if they have an option, but I know much of it is still virtual.
Mhm.
But I think that the high school is back to running clubs as well, too. Okay.
Yes, I do believe that you're right, that the middle school has kept its clubs virtual. And I think we have kind of adhered to if you can do it virtually, that might be the best way to do it. But given the fact now that that we're seeing success in the schools, I can imagine that if the students and the advisors really wanted to have an in-person meeting, and they did it, safely with 3+ feet of social distancing. I wouldn't be opposed to that at all.
Mm. And just as a quick aside, yesterday I was reading an article from MIT that did a study. I don't know if you happen to see this. They found in their studies that there's no difference in social distancing from 6 feet to 60 feet. It's all about the ventilation, and it's all about time spent, the proximity, real infiltration. It's not really so much about the actual distance. So I think as we hear more about that, it'll be interesting to see what the CDC has to say about that.
So you had asked about the reopening group. We were very lucky to have 3 sort of guests with us. One was, a hospital CEO. Another one was a PhD in virology, and then a pediatrician who is also has sort of a past in virology. And that was one of the things they just kept giving us literature. They kept saying, even really that distance almost between 3 feet and 6 feet becomes negligible based on, how far that aerosol will travel. But you're right, 6 feet to 60 feet, ventilation. I absolutely agree that there's a feeling that the science bears out that the difference is negligible.
Right. And of course, I didn't mention, but of course, like masks. I think masks are critical
yes.
for keeping aerosols out of the atmosphere.
Yes.
So I'm interested in the CDC, but I think the big group for you is DESE, the Department of Education. Now, I know they were really pushing. In fact, they mandated that students go back full time. Is there anything else that they're looking at next, or have they achieved their goal?
So K-5 had to be back by April 5th. And middle schools technically wouldn't have had to have gone back until Wednesday of this week on April 28th. And they still had said nothing about high schools. But we have a meeting with the commissioner tomorrow afternoon, and he had promised that he would give us an update on high schools in the month of April. And the clock is ticking. So I'm guessing that tomorrow we'll actually get official information about high schools, but it really isn't going to impact us here in Hopkinton because all of our kids are back now.
Right. What about, so kids were back. What about, does DESE get involved with sports? Do they make rules and regulations about that, or is that another regulatory agency?
Yeah, that's the MIAA. Yeah. So.
Okay. I haven't heard anything about them. I'm sure that, Rich Cormier has been hearing from them a lot.
I will say that both Evan and Rich are very active with the MIAA. And so, when we're making decisions about what, attendance at sporting events is going to look like, and some you do get a little bit of wiggle room. They'll say if you're able to have one parent attend or 2 parents attend, this is what it needs to look like. And I think Hopkinton has done a beautiful job of being able to have parent attendance at our sporting events. Obviously that's increased over time, but last fall we were so cautious, and still we felt it was important for kids and families to be able to celebrate, athletics.
Yeah.
Together as a family.
Yeah, and this season too, we HCAM, our staff has been putting so much more out, and so many people have contacted us to say that they're appreciative of that because they're not able to see it otherwise. And not only are they able to see it, but we put it live on the air and on our YouTube channel. So participants from both sides of the gridiron are able to tune in and see that. So that's been a real affirmation for us too.
Yes. And you know what? We've had kids who have been COVID positive, who have attended, a practice, or who have attended a game. And really, I think when the safety protocols are in place, what we find is that, there's been very, very limited transmission of that virus. There may have been like one transmission at a practice or something like that, but I feel very good about what has happened with, schools and athletics.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce a video.
Great.
Yes, our main man, Mike Trojan, stopped by the high school and the middle school today, which was the first day of all students back, and was able to put together this quick 4-minute video, giving some impressions of the day. So, Mike, whenever
Lovely.
you're
Thank
ready.
you.
How's it going today?
It's off to a good start. I mean, it's been a year where I feel like we've had probably like 4 or 5 different opening days, but having the time to really prepare and get classrooms ready, especially having April break where we didn't have any kids in the building, where we could move all the furniture and finalize schedules. I feel like that time allowed us to have a relatively successful opening. Yeah, so some of the things that we had to do in terms of preparing is we're using the cohort model. So all the kids are staying in a single classroom all year long, and teachers are moving from classroom to classroom. So we had to bring the kids who are home on an orange day in to be with the kids that are on a green day and vice versa. And so those schedules were very complicated because we have math levels, we have different foreign language options. And so having all those kind of constraints made scheduling very difficult. So we had to move some kids out of some cohorts. We had to change cohorts. Given the number of students in a classroom, we actually had to move some cohorts from one classroom that couldn't accommodate that number to a different classroom that had more square feet in it. So that was a big thing. We had to move all the desks out of the gymnasium where we've been serving lunch all year long into classrooms because we have more students in the building. And now we also have kids eating in the auditorium where we didn't have kids eating in the auditorium before, to make sure that we still have 6 feet of distance.
So, Mike, thank you very much. That was really, really good. And Dr. Cameron, the thing that I really love about that, have you ever seen those old photographs from like 100 years ago of just streetscapes and people walking in and out of stores? And how interesting that is. And when I see videos like this now, and also I would recommend if people haven't seen, we have scenes like this at the beginning of HHS Today and HMS Today, the little news shows. This is something that is, as you put it at the beginning of the show, is historical. This is an unprecedented event. And I really love to celebrate the ordinary. I love to, like when we see just regular, everyday events going on, there's just like tremendously cool things that are happening in our community and in our schools. And I love that we're able to see that. We're able to take a look into that. Now, the next question I have for you before our time runs out is, I've heard there's pool testing, and I know that vaccination rates are creeping up. So going forward, what are you looking at? What do you follow as you're charting the course for the HPS as we continue to try to get back to regular life as we can?
Well, if I can just take a moment to put in a little bit of plug for the pool testing. I would like to clarify a couple of things around that, and I would encourage parents to sign their children up. So the way it works is, if you, for example, Jim, were signed up, we would get you a swab kit. You would take it home, and then the next week when you came back, you would have used the swab the night before or the morning of, and then you just bring it and you scan it and drop it off in school. So it's relatively easy, and it doesn't take any time out of class. So it's not like you're going to miss your math lesson because you had to go and do pool testing. Nope, It's all done right there. But the other thing that's nice, and this might be the misconception, is that people are worried that, so say you and I are both in the same pool and my swab comes up positive, you do not have to quarantine, because we are using a company that would take all the individual swabs out. They would know which one was yours and which one was mine. And if I was the positive swab, they would just call the school and I would be dismissed and you would stay right there learning in your math class. So I just feel like this is a means for us. I mean, if we're going to do it, we're going to spend the money on it. It's a really nice way for us to say, you're safer if I'm not sitting next to you in math class. And the only way that we can make sure that this is happening is if a bunch of people do it. If we could get closer to 70 or 80%, I would really appreciate that. So if parents will sign their kids up, that would be wonderful. But I think the question you had for me is probably one of those sort of more global, like where do you see all of us going? And you do read frequently that we're not out of the woods with the pandemic, but I can imagine that the start of the school year in September should be pretty, what we would call typical or normal. I'm guessing that we're all still going to be wearing masks, which I think it's fine. Truly, I think we've all learned to do that in the last 13 months. But I would love to see us just have a nice, typical opener. You saw in those videos that Mike shot earlier today. You might have 3 kids who are walking shoulder to shoulder down the hall, but they're not going to be together for 15 minutes. They're going to be walking shoulder to shoulder for maybe 2 as they pass from one classroom to another. And I think people in their minds saw great big throngs of kids moving through the hallways, but we haven't really, you didn't see that. It's it. And the stuff that you put out when you do the TV news shows that the kids produce, same kind of images, so it's really nice that I think we're heading back to great instruction. In the middle school today, popping into some classes, it almost gets you misty because you're in there, you're watching one teacher teaching 22 kids, and they are all truly learning in the way that they would have pre-pandemic. They may have been a little physically closer, they may not have worn a mask, but that high quality instruction is back. And boy, am I grateful to the teachers and the custodians and the CAF workers and the paras and the nurses and everybody, administrators. It's great.
Yes. Now I'm curious about the pool testing. So I understand that for the student body, and I'm just wondering, do you include teachers in that? And would you have a different recommendation if a teacher is vaccinated versus not?
Well, one of the things that we've learned from the company is that, if you are fully vaccinated, your likelihood of coming in and contracting the virus or transmitting the virus or carrying the virus significantly lowered, right? But if there's any teacher or paraprofessional or administrator or anyone in our school districts who would like to take part in the pool testing, we're totally fine with that. If we're going to be doing this and we're all in, then mitigating any kind of risk that we can, no matter how small the risk, we're all for it.
Right. And which schools are participating in the pool testing?
Right now, all 5. And when the school committee originally voted on it, they did say that if they were getting very low turnout in a building, it might not make sense for us to kind of keep it up. So let's just pick a building. Let's pick Hopkins School. If only 5% of the student body was taking part in it, it probably wouldn't make sense to continue on at Hopkins. So we really are hoping that more students will do it. I understand that through a lot of hard work, and like some towns are at 25%, not dissimilar from where we are, but other towns that have worked very, very hard to convince people of the value in pool testing. Those are places where the numbers could be up around 70%. I'd love to move our needle in that direction.
No kidding. I just think that my father always would say, when you go into a doctor's appointment, don't hide anything. If you forget something, don't forget something, just bring it in. It's just a number, and it's just something that can be used to help. And I'm trying to think of why wouldn't there be 100% of people? If I had a child in the school system and I had the opportunity to, find out whether my child had been exposed or had contracted the virus. I can't really come up with why I would not want that information.
Mhm. No, and really, as I said, if you are in a pool and someone tests positive in that pool, unless it's you, you're not quarantining. So we've chosen a very high-end product that will do that reflex testing right in the lab at that moment. And we know whose swab is whose. So that's
Right.
important information to share with families.
Right, definitely.
The pool testing through DESE did not allow for that. So that was one of our concerns. And the other thing I think with that pool testing is if we tested today, it could be 48 hours before the results were back. So someone who was potentially positive would be walking around school for 2 days,
Mm-hmm. And with the company that you're going with, what's the turnaround time?
The very best turnaround time is about 24 hours. So
Okay.
yeah, so we really are pushing hard to get about the best product we could get for Hopkinton.
Right. Well, I'll be following up with you after. We should put a notice in HHS today too for the students to see too, and
Oh,
encourage
that would be
that.
great.
All right. So we got just about a minute left. I want to congratulate you on steering this ship back into a much more regular schedule. And I'm grateful for another giant step forward to moving past this pandemic and getting back to life to the full as we can live it. So thank you for all the work that you do and for the whole team at the HPS.
Well, I think the key word there is team, and we'll push to get the doors back open and get kids back in, but we wouldn't be here without all of the people who are serving some very important role in the buildings. So,
and that, I don't want to sound like I'm biased, but I am, everybody's biased. I am biased, is that I have always consistently felt that this school system is a cohesive unit, all working together. And the way they put it is that we all are focused like a laser on the students in the classroom. What is going to make them successful? What do we do in our job, whatever it may be, that makes that a success? And, that's a really great perspective to have.
it really is, and I told you earlier, like it was just misty going through that building today and seeing kids in classrooms with their peers and their teachers. And no matter what room we walked into, kids were learning at such high levels. It was, I don't know how the teachers feel, but I think there may be just a smidgen of relief that you're not worrying about those kids who are home. They're all with you. And I think,
right.
Teachers are nurturers.
Right. All right, Dr. Kavanaugh, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Okay. And thank you for watching this episode of the Hangout Hour. And please tune in next time for more. Have a great day, everyone.